Hi, and welcome back to the Pastor Study, where we are committed to helping you get to know your Bible better. I'm Paul Appleby. I'm the pastor of the First Christian Church of Lawton, Oklahoma, and today we will be concluding our study into the genealogy of Jesus Christ in the Gospel according to Matthew. You may be thinking to yourself, wow, could you have picked a more exciting, riveting passage to dig into? Well, faithful viewer, no, I really don't think so. I can think of very few places in the Bible that have as much excitement and intrigue and hard to pronounce names as the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel. Now, as we really dig into the text, we found out that there are some anomalies in this genealogy. The first thing we notice is Matthew's grouping of sets of 14. And as we discussed in our first video, this is a reference back to King David, and it's supposed to point the reader to the understanding that what's happening at the end of this final cycle of ancestors is the completion of all of the promises made to Abraham and to David, and in turn to the people of Israel, and the coming of Jesus as the Messiah. The second interesting feature of this genealogy is that we're reading the genealogy of Joseph, Jesus' stepdad. Through this, we learn the ways in which one's family of origin, whether they're your biological parents, step-parents, grandparents, adopted parents, however your family of origin happens to be put together, it greatly affects the way you understand yourself and the way you operate in the world. The next thing we see that's profoundly interesting in Jesus' genealogy in Matthew is the emphasis it places on multiple different women in Jesus' genealogy. It's a unique feature of genealogies given in the ancient world, and it's absolutely fascinating because each time a woman is mentioned in Jesus' family lineage, we learn something about the way God works in the world and the scope of God's plan for humanity. Today we're going to be looking at the wife of Uriah as she's introduced in Matthew's genealogy, or Bathsheba as she's better known to most of us students of the Bible. Let's take a look back in Matthew chapter 1 starting in verse 6 to see the way in which Matthew introduces this amazing woman. Here in Matthew 1:6 we read, Jesse was the father of David, the king. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been the wife of Uriah. We learn a little bit about this mother who had been the wife of Uriah, who ended up being Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother back in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. Let's turn there now. Back in 2 Samuel 11, we read starting in verse 1. In the spring, when kings go off to war, David, who was king of Israel at the time, sent Joab along with his servants and all the Israelites. And they destroyed the Ammonites, attacking the city of Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his couch and was pacing back and forth on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone and inquired about the woman, and the report came back. Isn't this Eliam's daughter, Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So David sent messengers to her. When she came to him, he had sex with her. Now she'd been purifying herself after her monthly period. Then she returned home. The woman conceived and sent word to David. I'm pregnant, she said. Then David sent a message to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked about the welfare of Joab and the army and how the battle was going. Then David told Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. However, Uriah slept at the palace entrance with all his master's servants. He didn't go down to his own house. David was told Uriah did not go down to his own house. So David asked Uriah, haven't you returned from a journey? Why didn't you go home? The chest in Israel and Judah are all living in tents, Uriah told David. And my master Joab and my master's troops are camping in the home field. How could I go home and eat, drink, and sleep with my wife? I swear on your very life, I will do no such thing. And David told Uriah, stay here one more day. Tomorrow I'll send you back. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day. The next day David called for him, and he ate and drank, and David got him drunk. In the evening Uriah went out to sleep in the same place alongside his master's servants, but he did not go down to his house, to his own home. The next morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. He wrote in the letter, place Uriah at the front of the fiercest battle, then pull back from him so that he will be struck down and die. So as Joab was attacking the city, he put Uriah in the place where he knew there were strong warriors. When the city soldiers came out and attacked Joab, some of the people from David's army fell. Uriah the Hittite was also killed. Joab sent a complete report of the battle to David. When you finish reporting all the news of the battle to the king, Joab instructed the messenger, if the king gets angry and asks you, why did you go so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know they would shoot from the wall? Who killed Jerubbaal's son Abimelech? Didn't a woman throw an upper millstone on the top of him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you go so close to the wall? Then say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead too. So the messenger set off, and when he arrived, he reported to David everything Joab sent him to say. The men overpower us, the messenger told David. They came out against us in the open field, but we fought against them up to the entrance of the city gate. Archers shot down on your servants from the wall. Some of the king's servants died. And your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead too. David said to the messenger, say this to Joab. Don't be upset about this because the sword is that way, taking the life of this person or that. Continue attacking the city and destroy it. Encourage Joab. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for her husband. After the time of mourning was over, David sent for her and brought her back to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. But what David had done was evil in the Lord's eyes. As we continue reading in this passage, we learn that the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had borne for David, and he became very sick. David begged God for the boy. He fasted and spent the night sleeping on the ground. The senior servants of his house approached him to lift him up off the ground, but he refused, and he wouldn't eat with them either. On the seventh day, the child died. David's servants were afraid to tell him the child had died. David wouldn't listen to us when we talked to him while the child was still alive. How can we tell him the child's died? He'll do something terrible. When David saw his servants whispering, he realized the child had died. Is the child dead? David asked his servants. Yes, they said, he is dead. Then David rose from the ground, bathed, anointed himself, and changed his clothes. He entered the Lord's house and bowed down. And he entered his own house. He requested food, which was brought to him, and he ate. Why are you acting this way? His servants asked. When the child was alive, you fasted and cried and kept watch, but now that the child's dead, you get up and eat? David replied, when the child was alive, I fasted and wept because I thought, who knows? Maybe the Lord may have mercy on me and let the child live. But he's dead now. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? No. I'm going where he is, but he will not come back to me. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba. He went in to her, and he slept with her. And she gave birth to a son named Solomon. The Lord loved him, and sent word by the prophet Nathan to name him Jedediah, because of the Lord's grace. Here in this story, we learn about the kind of trauma that was done by David when, instead of going out to battle as he should have, he stayed behind and let others do his work for him. When he should have been minding his own business, instead he was prowling around on the palace roof. He saw another man's wife, and instead of respecting Bathsheba's humanity, her relationship with Uriah, his role as king, he abused his power, and he abused this woman. I find it fascinating as we read in Matthew's genealogy, she's remembered as the wife of Uriah. Her trauma is not swept under the rug. The evil that was done to her and her husband is not forgotten. Yet still the Lord looked with favor upon her And we read later, because of her cunning, the place of her son Solomon as David's heir was upheld. Bathsheba was a clever woman. And because of her quick thinking and her incisive action, her place in the lineage of Christ is secured. And so in reading about all of these women in Jesus' history, we learn about the inclusion of people who are outside of the kingdom of God, at least as the Israelites conceived it, being brought in. We learn about allegiances that are higher than allegiance to family or allegiance to nation. We learn about cunning and crafty women who use their intellect, their abilities, and the resources at hand to secure a future not just for themselves, but a future that would ultimately lead to Christ and to our own inclusion in the people of God. We learn about care for the foreign, for the alien, for the weak and the poor. We learn about the importance that trauma can play in our lives and the idea that when injustice is done, it is not ultimately forgotten. But even in the face of injustice, God can use what others intend for evil and their own selfish ends to the good of us all. In the genealogy of Jesus Christ, we learn some absolutely amazing lessons. And taking those into consideration and seeing the actions of those in our family, not just women like Tamar, but men like Judah, not just women like the wife of Uriah, Bathsheba, but men like David, we can make decisions about the sort of person we want to be in the world. Are we going to be people who give our word but keep it only when it's convenient and only when it doesn't seem to cost us anything? Are we going to be people who practice our lives however we want but trumpet our own righteousness in public? Are we going to be the sort of people who take what we want and utilize the power given to us to further our own end regardless of who it hurts and regardless of the consequence? Or are we going to be people who use the gift of craft and cunning to further God's way in the world, to enlarge God's family and the community that would become the vast people of God? Are we going to use the blessings and resources that we have at hand to feed and care for the poor, the struggling, the foreigner, and the alien in our midst? Are we going to use the intelligence God gave us to address and solve the problems facing our world? These are the decisions that we can make. What kind of people are we going to be as part of the larger family of God? I know the sort of person I hope to be. And I hope for your sake you make the decision to be the best version of yourself that you can. Thank you for joining us today in the Pastor's Study. This is all the time we have for today. I look forward to seeing you next week. Goodbye, and God bless.